For the first time in nearly 2 decades, a major Republican political figure delivered a speech at Howard University. Senator Rand Paul visited the historically black college in D.C. on Wednesday and delivered what some have viewed as controversial remarks about the history of racism in America. Here are the highlights.
No Republican questions or disputes civil rights. I've never wavered in my support for civil rights or the Civil Rights Act. What gets lost is that the Republican Party has always been the party of civil rights and voting rights. Because Republicans believe that the federal government is limited, though, and that its function is limited by the Constitution, some have concluded that Republicans are somehow inherently insensitive to minority rights. Nothing could be further from the truth. The tragedy of segregation and Jim Crow in the South is compounded when you realize that integration began in New England in 1840s and 1850s. The story of emancipation, of voting rights, and of citizenships from Frederick Douglass to the modern era is really, in fact, the history of the Republican Party.
Here was reaction to the senator's remarks, Project 21 member Charles Butler, and from the New York Civil Rights Coalition, Michael Myers. Party of Lincoln. Al Gore's father wasn't there, as I said the other night, but it was Republicans that, for the 64 voting Civil Rights Act, 65 voting rights. What's your problem? Why you shushing me?
Rand Paul.
So what?
This is not a conversion of Paul on the road to Damascus.
Why?
This is Ron Paul wading in the political waters and gurgling and almost drowning in idiocy and non sequiturs because he doesn't understand and doesn't know about civil rights or much less race history.
Instead of the hyperbole, what do you disagree with?
You're going to talk about civil rights legislation and going to say the Republicans were responsible for that only? The Democrats too. What about JFK, LBJ?
Hang on a second.
Wait a minute. What about Mike Mansfield?
Where were these?
Hubert Humphrey. Democrats.
You know, the myth about JFK, it just astounds me. JFK voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1957. There is. He voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1957, and the only reason he voted against
the Civil Rights Act in 1963.
He did not.
And Lyndon Baines Johnson got it through.
But there were two civil rights acts already passed by Eisenhower, 57 and 60. The Civil Rights Acts of 57 created the U.S. Civil Rights Commission.
All right, hang on a second.
The Civil Rights Act of 58 was suppressed.
All right, but you just made my point. That it was the filibuster came from Southern Democrats. Al Gore's father didn't vote for it. So, but why is there this impression?
But there were Democrats and Republicans who joined forces to pass federal civil rights legislation.
And the Republicans don't get the credit.
At a time like Rand Paul's father started talking about, you know, the rights of privacy, private owners to discriminate against people, to deny people their civil rights based on their skin color.
That's just wrong.
And then Ron Paul says, well, I didn't write my own newsletter. I didn't say that.
That's his father. He's not responsible for his father.
Rand Paul said, Paul in 2010 made similar
remarks. Let me just say this, because Michael, you know, Michael talks a lot.
Americans better off under Obama's policies?
You're changing the subject. You know I'm going to say no.
Absolutely not.
You know I'm going to say no. Back to Red. But that's not because Obama's a Democrat and that George Bush was a Republican. That's not the issue. That's not the issue.
The bottom line here is what Rand did was to reach out. Unlike other people, Obama's doing his campaign.
Rand started talking about marching.
Rand reached out.
About marching. If he had been of age, he would march. The question is not marching.
Michael, you always cut people off. You always
talk like
question
of whose side you
this
on.
wild,
the question
ranting
is
style.
You give me a headache. Sean, Charles first, and then Michael. Charles, go. Finish your thought.
Thank you. The bottom line is, what Rand Paul did was a very courageous thing. I saw the whole interview. I watched it twice. The students asked great questions. He had great responses. It was a great exchange.
Let me go to Michael.
It was not courageous. It was idiotic. Here's this guy talks about, well, you know, I could have marched with Martin Luther King Jr. That's not the issue. Marching is, okay, whose side are you on? The question is law, and which side is the Constitution going to be on? And at the time when people like Southern Democrats and others, they were arguing that the law could not be placed on the side of blacks because they were concerned about the privacy.
But the black community votes. Hang on, Charles. The black community votes 90% Democrat, But they're not better off
Why
under
don't-
Democratic policies.
I can't even talk
That's
about
right.
All right.
Rand Paul, who started talking
go.
about private clubs. Private
Up
clubs
next,
were exempted
the
from the civil
IRS
rights laws.
is reading your
He
private
doesn't know
emails
what
and
he's
texts
talking
without a
about.
warrant.